bonsoir, good evening, welcome to this École des Modernités lecture, welcome to this Giacometti Institute. Tonight's lecture will be given by Julia Andrews, who's next to me, and I would like to thank her very much for accepting the invitation to give this lecture. Julia Andrews is Professor Emerita and Academy Professor at Ohio State University. Her work focuses on modern and contemporary art in and outside China. She was the first American art historian to conduct dissertation research in China after formal establishment of US-China relations in 1979. Her first book was Painters and Politics in the People's Republic of China, 1949-1979. It was published by University of California Press in 1994. More recently, with Professor Cai Yuanpei, who already gave a lecture in the program and who's making our honor to be present tonight, she co-authored Art of Modern China. She conceived also exhibitions, and among them the first American exhibitions on contemporary Chinese art. The first one was Fragmented Memory, the Chinese Avant-Garde in Exile, in 1993. She co-created A Century in Crisis, Modernity and Tradition in the Art of 20th Century China. And she also coordinated the exhibitions Light Before Dawn, An Official Chinese Art, 1974-1985, and the exhibition Painting Her Way, the Ink Art of Feng Chaoling. Her current research focuses and is dedicated to the French-trained painter Lin Fengmian, and it will be one of the focus of tonight's lecture, whose title is The Lieu of the West, Chinese Modernists and Interwar Paris. It will focus on figures such as Pang Suqin or Feng Mian, who mainly from Shanghai, but other regions also from China, came to Paris to connect, to interact with what they saw as a modern enterprise in the arts. So thank you again very much, Julia, for accepting this lecture. And well, the floor is yours. We're all ears to be introduced in this fantastic subject. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'd like to also thank you very much for the invitation to Paris and to the great hospitality and support that you and the museum staff have offered in this week. The intense interest in the art and culture of Paris by young Chinese artists between the two world wars might lead us to expect a one-directional flow of ideas from France to Asia. Yet the networks of individuals with connections to France yielded both such flows and some surprising countercurrents, ripples that washed from one generation to the next. My talk tonight will consider some of these individuals. The most eye-catching work to emerge from the Parisian ferment of the 1920s and 30s is that inspired by the modernist movements of the time. Cubist paintings created after return from Paris by Lin Fengmian or Fan Ganmin. In what context did this modernist painting appear, and what was its legacy for future generations? A critical node in this network is philosopher and educator Cai Yuanpei, who was not himself an artist, but whose influence was felt throughout the cultural world of the first decades of China's republic. He served as mentor to Lin Fengmian and many others in the art world, and among his other accomplishments, established the Beijing Art Academy, the National Hangzhou Art Academy, the Shanghai Conservatory of Music, and the Academia Sinica. A brilliant scholar, he had passed the old-style national examinations as a young man in the 1890s, received a distinguished appointment to the Hanlin Academy, and in the normal course of events would have become a government official. In 1895, however, just as he began his career, decades of misrule and foreign aggression came to a head with the humiliating defeat of China by the forces of Japan. Recognition of the evident success with which the island nation had modernized over the previous quarter century led to urgent calls in China to adopt modern educational models and promote science, technology, manufacturing, and defense. Cai Yuanpei assumed administrative and educational roles in several such schools, including the notable Nanyang College, which later became Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Early English language accounts say that Cai fled China because of his association with the Reform movement in 1904. In any case, his commitment to study abroad was crucial to his views of modernizing China. He first spent time in Paris, where he joined the revolutionary Chinese Alliance Society, or Tongmenghui, which sought to overthrow the imperial dynasty. He also became an influential member of a group of Chinese anarchists centered in Paris. Inspired by Peter Kropotkin's text on mutual aid, the ideas of voluntarism, fraternity, and mutualism were integral to their thinking about the future of humanity. Cai went on to Leipzig to study philosophy and aesthetics in 1907. After the success of the revolution in 1912, he was invited back to China by its first Republican president, Sun Yat-sen, to lead the Ministry of Education. He resigned and returned to Europe after Sun left office the next year, at the outbreak of what came to be the warlord period, but was recalled as president of Peking University. He was subsequently in and out of administrative positions with frequent travel to Europe, but his influence in China remained strong until the end of his life. With his new responsibility in 1912, Cai designed and widely publicized a 5-part network for the new education: military education, utilitarian education, moral education, education for a worldview, and finally, aesthetic education. Aesthetic education particularly was an essential innovation in his dream of creating a cosmopolitan culture in contemporary China. Cai demonstrated the ability to hire thoughtful and effective people to implement the new education. He recruited Lu Xun, who would later emerge as a pioneer of modern fiction and an advocate for the modern woodcut, to a post charged with establishing a program for the ministry's cultural exhibitions. Assuming presidency of Peking University in 1916, Cai initiated an art research group to consider the future art of China. In 1918, the young painter Xu Beihong delivered a speech thoroughly castigating China's traditional art and its corrupt art world. Cai Yuanpei arranged a scholarship for him to travel to France, where after preliminary study, he was admitted to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris in May of 1921. Cai himself elaborated on his educational proposals in a widely publicized 1917 lecture entitled "Replace Religion with Aesthetic Education." Elevating aesthetic education, he believed, would lead the public to a higher plane of thinking and behavior, thus freeing society from negative attitudes such as selfishness. The ethical virtues he associated with the arts raised them to a high position in his own time and affected policies long after his death in 1940. The Paris group of anarchists were stimulated by their positive experiences in France to promote wider access in China to study abroad. 2 of the Sino-French exchange programs with which Cai was closely associated were instrumental in training Chinese artists in the modern manner. The first was the Diligent Work Frugal Study program, which welcomed Chinese workers and students to Europe after the First World War. The Sino-French Education Association assigned some participants to factories and others to schools. Among the hundreds of work-study participants between 1919 and 1921 were the future leaders of China's Communist Party, including Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, and Zhu De. They were among those for whom factory labor convinced of the need for an economic revolution. Yet the program offered opportunities to young people who would take a different path. The adventurous young painter Lin Fengmian and his classmates Lin Wenzheng and Li Jinfa traveled to Shanghai from their native Guangdong after high school graduation, determined to venture overseas. Their applications were successful, and they departed Shanghai for Marseille on Christmas Day in 1919. 17 such groups were sent to France in 1919 and 1920. The aspiring artists arrived in Marseille in early 1920, and by the end of the year, Lin Fengmian had been accepted by the École nationale des beaux-arts in Dijon. On the recommendation of director Ovidien Sens, in September 1921, Lin moved from Dijon to the Paris studio of Fernand Cormont, joining a distinguished roster of past students, including Van Gogh and Matisse. By the fall of 1922, his painting Autumn had been accepted for display at the Autumn Salon. Little evidence has surfaced that might help us understand the artistic and social circles in which this group of friends circulated. It is known, however, that a supporter of the Burgundian art group, Le Sort, introduced Lin Fengmian to the French painter André Clodot, who had also studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Dijon. Clodot was born in Dijon to a luthier's family that hoped he would become a cellist. A lifelong rebel, he instead entered art school at the age of 13. He went on to Paris in 1909 with a government scholarship to study at the National Academy of Decorative Arts, but rebelled against its academic instruction and dropped out. Free-thinking, anti-clerical, and anti-militarist, he became involved with members of the anarchist movement in Paris, and for years would provide drawings for their journal. This brought the young artist to the attention of the authorities, who listed him with foreign spies and Frenchmen considered dangerous by the state. Despite his pacifist stance, he was conscripted in World War I and spent 5 years between 1914 and 1919 in the military. During that time, he continued to draw anti-war political cartoons and was only protected from arrest by an editor who took responsibility for publishing Clodot's drawing. By the time Lin Fengmian met Clodot, Clodot was an accomplished cartoonist, oil painter, printmaker, organizer, and designer. Lin came to admire both his art and his rebellious character. And in Paris, Lin's young Chinese friends were said to have visited Clodot and the artists at La Rouge. In the spring of 1924, Lin Fengmian and his friend Liu Jipiao organized an exhibition of almost 500 objects of historical and contemporary Chinese art at the Palace of the Rhine in Strasbourg. Lin Fengmian contributed 14 of his own oils and 28 watercolors. The contemporary artworks were mainly from 2 groups of Chinese artists in France and included both fine and decorative arts. Xu Beihong, although not a member of either group, sent 4 oils and 4 watercolors from Paris. His classmate at Beaux-Arts, Fang Junbi, sent 13 oils. Others came from the Institut Franco-Chinois in Lyon, the second major study abroad program initiated by Cai. Cai Yuanpei wrote of his cosmopolitan aspirations in the exhibition catalog. For a nation's civilization to make constant contributions in the world, it must be founded on a long-lasting culture, and it must nourish itself from other civilizations. This proves that the penetration of the 2 arts, Occidental and Oriental, is necessary. While Lin Fengmian concentrated on painting, his friend Liu Jipiao pursued design and later architecture. In this case, designing the cover for the catalog and exhibition display. Here he uses the Chinese names of the Association of Chinese Artists in France and the Chinese Society for Decorative Arts in Paris as ornamental motifs. Their friend Li Keran studied sculpture. Lin Wenzheng dedicated himself to literature and art history. The 4 young men thus undertook, whether by simple inclination or by plan, mastery of the 3 branches of European fine arts, painting, sculpture, and architecture, as well as the critical literature that might support it. Through the support of Cai Yuanpei, they would later establish these branches of study at the newly created National Westlake Art Academy in Hangzhou. In the spring of 1925, Lin Fengmian and his friends further organized the Chinese submission to the Paris Exhibition of Decorative Arts. The catalog cover and exhibition design were once again by Liu Jipiao. The text was written by Cai Yuanpei and Lin Wenzheng. Cai's appeared in both Chinese and French, speaking to dual audiences. Lin Wenzheng explicated Lin Fengmian's now lost work. Voir Vivre is a monumental painting, an uncontested masterpiece that excites in us great admiration and a bit of terror. One sees in it royal tigers majestically perched on the rocks bordering a limpid stream, their jaws agape and eyes glowing with sinister fire and ferocity. A powerful and pessimistic breath animates these beasts of unconscious cruelty. Will to live at all costs, even at the expense of the lives of others. What sadness and despair. The artist, he wrote, seems to have been profoundly influenced by the pessimism of Schopenhauer. Will to live is the eternal symbol of man and all living beings, large and small, strong and weak. André Clodeau, who worked as a designer for other sections of this international event, and we see him here at the top. Anyway, we see him sitting at the on the scaffolding of the construction of the event. Later conveyed his enthusiasm for Lin Fengmian's panels in the display. Just before opening the Art Deco exposition, the widowed Lin Fengmian remarried Alice Vaton, a friend of André Clodeau's younger sister, who he had met in art school. Late in his life, Lin credited her with introducing him to the light of the Italian painters. The couple settled in Dijon, where they were visited by Cai Yuanpei. The 1925 exhibition catalog already lists Lin Fengmian's title as professor at the Beijing Art Academy, suggesting that Cai Yuanpei had arranged his new job. With a belief that Sun Yat-sen's northern expedition would reunify China, conclude the warlord period, and reestablish the republic, young people in Cai Yuanpei's orbit were willing to contribute to this collective cause. Lin Fengmian and Alice thus returned to China in early 1926. Upon arrival in Shanghai, Lin learned that he had also been elected director of the Beijing Art Academy, a school founded by Cai Yuanpei in 1918. As they had in Europe, Lin and his colleagues used every means they could to promote the new trends in art that had become their life's mission. Lin himself held a solo exhibition of more than 100 works within the first month of beginning his new position in March. Perhaps they looked like this, works that are now lost. Moreover, establishing the best of French pedagogy and attitudes was equally essential. On July 7, 1926, Lin Fengmian sent an urgent telegram to Lin Wenzheng in Paris. Tell Liu Jipiao and Clodeau to come immediately to Beijing. Good positions, impossible to send travel money. Find it themselves. Respond by telegram, Lin Fengmian. From Clodeau's arrival in China, Lin Fengmian made his admiration for him widely known. In September 1926, a short notice, possibly drafted by Lin, accompanied by a photograph of the artist in the Sunday supplement of Beijing's Morning Post, was accompanied by the hyperbolic caption, "This is Clodeau's work, exhibited in 1924 in the Paris Salon of Independence. Its style is resolute and lively, matching that of earlier generations. His every painting influences the entirety of Europe." A 10-day solo exhibition publicized as by the famous French artist Clodeau was mounted at the Academy in October of 1926. The following year, a fuller version of Lin's column appeared. He first outlines Clodeau's education, and then reveals some of the reasons for his own admiration. But because Clodeau has a romantic temperament filled with creativity, he was disgusted by the derivative and mechanical academic education. After 2 or 3 years at the Academy, he left school life to create a new artistic movement. The critic said, "From Clodeau's painting, we can see his forceful and lively brushwork, and at the same time, experience a vast and profound atmospheric pressure on our hearts. He is a master of neo-impressionism." Others say, Clodo's paintings do not aim at formal completion, but emphasize expression of inner spirit, so harmoniously unify form and spirit. The mutual admiration was reciprocated in an anonymous French language publication that appeared in both Shanghai and French 2 years later, and was either authored by or inspired by Clodo's opinions. His panels of tigers, of deer, of birds in the 1925 Art Deco exhibition were justifiably appreciated by the critics as well as by the public. Success. We learned from this French article that when Lin arrived at the Beijing school, he found that there was no studio for life drawing and no courses in sculpture. He therefore added them. And we see here Clodo teaching life drawing from a nude model. Here's an example of Clodo's oil painting from his China period. With Clodo's collaboration, Lin Fengmian also filled the weekly newspapers with reproductions of art. In the spring of 1927, Lin Fengmian, Clodo, and their colleagues launched the ambitious Beijing Art Salon, or Beijing Yishu Dahui. As head of the publicity department, Clodo and his colleague, the musician Li Shuhua, wrote, "My friend Lin Fengmian and all the professors and students continue to fight. We hope to take this school and change it into a center for pure art and enable art to be understood in society. This art movement is the first call of the Chinese Renaissance." The publicity blitz further emphasized Clodo's celebrity. The Frenchman Clodo has the greatest influence. More than 10 painting groups have been formed. Lin and his team proposed holding a great art exposition based on the French Salon. The goal is to concentrate artistic strength and put into practice an entire artistic movement. They had excited the students. Clodo saved the student catalog for the cartoon section with a striking woodcut cover and produced by one of the 10 groups. And I'm grateful to Rachel Mazui, who now has collected this work, for sharing it with us. The little pamphlet also included Clodo's own cartoons. Notably, it was made 4 years earlier than Lucian's woodcut workshop of 1931, which is considered the beginning of China's modern woodcut movement. Clodo's team published the ardent student slogans: "Down with imitative traditional art, down with art that's divorced from the people, down with the hegemony of aristocratic art, artists of the East and West unite." Their exhilarated tone is matched by the rare surviving evidence of modernist student art in Clodo's collection. A quarter century later, this proponent of non-objective art, Xu Huo, who was then using the given name Fire, or Huo, would become a department chair at the Central Academy of Arts and Crafts under his original name, Xu Zhenpeng. Clodo's most memorable connection in Beijing may have been with the elderly Qi Shi, who Clodo recognized throughout his life as a great painter and a fine man. Qi Shi's work was exhibited in the Beijing Art Salon, and Lin Fengmian hired him at the Academy in 1927. Qi's own autobiography, which was an oral account written down by his young colleague, refers to the profound impact Clodo had on his self-confidence. There was a French professor called Clodo. He praised me to such an extreme degree that I was nonplussed. What impressed Clodo? One may recognize shared motifs derived from their observations of life in China, and boldness of line, despite the very different perspectives deployed by the two artists. For Clodo at right, the habits of a European-style deep recession take our eye into a three-dimensional space beyond the sailboat to the horizon line. Qi, in his vertical composition, exploits the possibilities of a sharply tilted and not entirely consistent ground plane in which a few boulders suggest a break between water and sky. Clodo achieves effects similar to the fei bai, or flying white, of Qi Bai Shi, as his quickly applied strokes of deep wet ink give way to traces of the dry white ground of his Western paper. Qi Bai Shi, however, achieves his effects more calmly and methodically, with the sure hand of a calligrapher on soft Chinese paper. Clodo's aim seems to be a simplicity and directness of line quality, inspired by his admiration for the Chinese master. Upon Clodo's departure for the South in the late summer of 1928, Qi Bai Shi presented him with a painting album and a seal. From this time on, Clodo frequently impressed the seal on his China period paintings. In 1927, during the dictatorship of warlord Zhang Zuolin in Beijing, Lin Fengmian fled to Nanjing. With the victory of the nationalist forces, a wave of optimism swept China's cultural world. Cai Yuanpei was appointed director of the university's council, a loosely organized governmental organ he conceived to replace the Ministry of Education. Under his auspices, Lin Fengmian was asked to establish a new school in the scenic city of Hangzhou, the Westlake National Art Academy. In February of 1928, they announced the faculty, including the French artist Clodo. All but the ink painter Pantin Shou were part of Lin Fengmian's circles in France. They included Lin Wenzheng as academic dean, Li Jinfa as head of sculpture, Liu Jipiao as head of architecture. Li Jinfa, like Lin Fengmian, returned to China with a European wife. Wu Dayu, who associated with the Cantonese art students during his time in Paris from 1922 to 1927, was named head of Western painting at the new academy. Initially influenced by post-impressionism and constantly urging his students to learn from Cézanne, he would later emerge as a strong advocate for abstract painting. Fan Ganmin, who had studied in Lyon and Paris, was also key to the oil painting instruction. Fang enrolled at the Shanghai Art Academy after his high school graduation in 1924, where he was taught for a year by the Russian émigré Viktor Pogorsky. In 1925, he left for France, first studying at the Beaux-Arts in Lyon. In 1927, Fang moved to Paris to the studio of Jean-Paul Laurin. His classmate in Lyon was Cai Weilian, the daughter of Cai Yuanpei, who had spent much of her early life in Europe with her father. Cai Weilian, who returned to China with her father in 1926, was also appointed to the oil painting faculty at the new academy, one of the few women. In both Chinese and German, her name is male, perhaps a gesture by her father toward female equality. A painter of some promise, her colleagues remembered her as constantly painting and drawing to the very end of her brief life. And here we see a painting by William Cai. Wu Guanzhong, a graduate of the National Academy, recalled the great encouragement he received as a young student when she responded to his watercolor in a school exhibition by offering to trade it for one of her own oils. She died at age 35 from childbirth complications while in wartime exile. She left her devastated husband, Lin Wenzheng, with 6 small children. Her broken-hearted father died in Shanghai the following year in 1940. Hers was the most drastic career end of any of the European trained artists of her generation, and more than a decade premature. 12 years earlier, in the optimistic early days of the new Nanjing government, the National Westlake Art Academy had opened with 150 students, 18 Chinese instructors, and the Frenchman Clodo. Students were required to study drawing and French language, along with their majors. In addition to European-style fine arts curriculum, Chinese painting was taught by Pantin Shou. Chinese and Western music were also offered. André Clodo continued to teach drawing and painting after moving from Beijing to the Westlake Academy, with particular responsibility of training the graduate students in oil painting. He, along with Lin Fengmian, served as faculty mentor for a student group that would prove historically significant, the 18 Arts Society. It was perhaps a coincidence that Clodo's role with the 18 Arts Society corresponded to a period of struggle between politically activist students and an increasingly repressive government. But it's noteworthy that Clodo and the students shared many political and social attitudes. The 18 Arts Society was originally a group of 18 undergraduates and graduate students organized in 1929, the 18th year of the Republic. In the spring of 1930, the students gave Clodo a photograph taken by the Hangzhou photo studio, Arwoxuan, which documented 14 students from the group surrounding their mentor and his wife. Although undated, it was probably taken in the spring of 1930 as a memento of Clodo's last days at the school. Clodo did not join the Communist Party until a decade after returning to France, and his contributions to the Communist Revolution in China were not very overt. Because of his care for his students, however, he nonetheless became entangled in complications after the nationalist government began cracking down on left-wing dissent. His graduate students, Li Keran and Zhang Tiao, were key members of the 18 Arts Society. Because the subsequent core of the Communist art and educational leadership included 18 society members, and its artists made pioneering contributions to the leftist modern woodcut movement during the war, accounts of its history have a near hagiographic quality. After holding several exhibitions at school in Hangzhou, in January of 1930, the group exhibited at the Ningbo Native Place Association in Shanghai, a prominent venue for art exhibitions. They published a small illustrated catalog with a title, Westlake 18 Society Exhibition Special Issue, inscribed on the front cover by Cai Yuanpei. The preface was written by the Academy's French-trained sculpture professor, Li Keran, and a small selection of exhibited works in oil, watercolor, and ink were illustrated. In the spring of that year, however, a wave of enthusiasm for proletarian art swept the campus and fractured the group. Clodo's graduate student, Zhang Tiao, who was later revealed to have been an underground communist, was arrested and sent to a military prison. As their advisor, Clodo, who had barely escaped a similar fate for his political cartoons as a young man, and the school director, Lin Fengmian, personally guaranteed his release. Lin Fengmian later recalled that in the fall, after Clodo had returned to France, the authorities came looking for Zhang Tiao, but by that time he had completely disappeared. Lin Fengmian urged Li Keran to save himself by leaving Hangzhou. The oil painter and printmaker Hu Yichuan, whose protest print we see here, had entered the academy as an undergraduate in 1925 and later confirmed Clodo's involvement. Writing 50 years later, he recalled a group of future communist art educators with whom he, Li Keran, and Zhang Tiao frequently associated. Most were also Clodo's students. Wang Jianfei would author the introduction to the 18 Society's 1931 exhibition catalog, notorious after it was banned for including an essay by Lu Xun. Wang Jianfei, Shan Fuwan, Hu Yichuan, and several other 18 Society colleagues who had joined the 1931 show were expelled as communists from the academy in 1932, and many moved to Shanghai. Hu Yichuan, who eventually became director of the Guangzhou Academy of Fine Arts, persisted in printmaking, but later in his life returned to painting oil landscapes, almost as though picking up where his classes with Clodo had left off 50 years earlier. Clodo's charisma also captured the heart of the undergraduate painter Shan Fuwan, who entered the Hangzhou Academy in its first class and remained inspired long after his teacher had returned to France in 1931. When Shan was accepted for study in the painting department, his initial interest was in the study of guohua, or Chinese painting. He began a thrilling transformation, however, after studying charcoal drawing with Clodo for 18 months. He completely gave up Chinese painting, and as the critics later tell us, passed his days as though intoxicated, drawing with charcoal and painting in oils to depict the beauty of the lake and hills around Westlake. After expulsion from the academy in the political crackdown, he He carved leftist woodcuts, which eventually led to a 2-month jail term. He then devoted himself to advancing China's applied arts, and in August of 1935, traveled to Tokyo to learn lacquer making, an art he considered practical and for the masses. Many modernists, particularly after socialist realism was mandated in the third quarter of the 20th century, turned their attention to crafts and design. Sun Fuan is now considered to be the leading figure in 20th century Chinese lacquer art, with work collected by the Victoria and Albert Museum. He ended his career as director of the Sichuan Academy of Fine Arts, which incidentally had a strong lacquer workshop. As advisor to the oil painting graduate students, Clodo's name is even more closely linked with that of his most notable protege, Li Keran. And it's in an account of his career that I'd like to end this rumination on flows and counterflows of artistic thought and practice. In a farewell photograph that the class took in June of 1930, the lean figure of Li Keran stands at the center of the row of students behind Clodo. The student who may have best absorbed the ideals of Lin Fengmian and Clodo, Li Keran developed a highly original approach over a lifetime of sustained artistic development. Riding the ups and downs of the political and social movements, he persisted to create a revolution in landscape painting. Li did not travel to Europe until he was 50, in 1957, as part of a brief Soviet bloc artistic exchange. But his experience at the Hangzhou Academy imbued him with an ambition to challenge the status quo. He exhibited a striking oil landscape in the 1937 National Exhibition, a work that is sparer and more restrained, and arguably more modern than any of Clodo's paintings. The painting shows a touch of Clodo's style in the animated circular sweep of the lone tree's foliage, however. In the same exhibition, Lin Fengmian continued to explore a Cubist style. After the outbreak of the war in 1938, Li Keran joined a wartime propaganda effort organized at the temporary capital of Wuhan. His striking cover images for wartime periodicals appear to be woodcuts, displaying a strength in graphic design not typically associated with his name, but reminiscent of Clodo's power and the work of the 18 Society. As the capital shifted further inland to Chongqing, Li moved with it. Once in Chongqing, he returned to his youthful interest in Chinese ink painting, but now sought a pure and naive quality similar to that of Clodo's much-admired colleague, Qi Shi. In Chongqing, Li Keran met frequently with his old teacher, Lin Fengmian, who was painting almost exclusively in ink and watercolor at the time, a practice he continued henceforth. Is this wet sketch from the late 40s his teenage daughter or an imaginary European? His little daughter is at the far right in that group picture. In 1942, Li came to the attention of Xu Beihong, who invited him to study the works by Qi Shi he had acquired in Beijing. When Xu Beihong offered Li Keran a position at the Beiping Art Academy after the war, he seized the opportunity to seek instruction directly with Qi Shi and the equally venerable Huang Binhong, who was still in Beijing. Although he turned away from the practice of oil painting, Li Keran eventually realized the aspirations of Lin Fengmian and André Clodo to reconcile the best qualities of Eastern and Western art in his ink painting. In the early 1950s, after a long sketching trip, he undertook a project of creating ink paintings based on landscape drawings from life, works on paper that incorporated novel effects of light and perspective and merged Chinese and Western brush methods. A government-sponsored visit to Eastern Europe in 1957, which gave him the opportunity to see classical European paintings, seems to have accelerated his progress. Over the course of subsequent decades, the effects of light and shade that enlivened his landscape drawings gradually became the main focus of his mountain scenes. In the end, he created new ways of using ink, replacing conventional techniques and imagery with those of his own invention to yield new visions of nature and the Chinese landscape. Persistent exploration over a lifetime, a quality of his own character, was essential to Li Keran's artistic achievement. Both his deep engagement with Lin and Clodaux's ideas of aesthetic and social liberation, as well as Clodaux's demonstrations of technical virtuosity, also seem to have remained constant threads in his development. Clodaux's enthusiasm for Qi was matched a generation later by his pupil Li Keran. And the breakthrough, the student of interwar Francophile modernists achieved in the art of Chinese landscape painting, we might see the flows and counterflows of artistic ideas coming together in a cosmopolitan vocabulary. A second institution in which Cai Yuanpei played a crucial role was the French-Chinese Institute in Lyon, which opened in 1921 with the goal of offering higher education in France to Chinese graduates. Among the 473 students, both male and female, enrolled between 1921 and 1950, only about 15 declared fine arts as their major. Yet, serving as teachers, publishers, and critics, the majority emerged as figures influential in promoting modern art to the Chinese art world. Best known among them may be the female artist Pan Yang, who entered in the first class in 1921 after studying at the Shanghai Art Academy. She later became a professor at her alma mater and at the National Central University, putting a decade of effort into the new art of pedagogy. She showed pastels, as you see here, at the 1929 National Art Exhibition, something of a novelty in China at the time. Her student Yu Feng was the only woman in a significant exhibition of modernist art in which Zhao Wuji, Lin Fengmian, Peng Shunqin, Li Zhongsheng, and other artists exhibited. Pan Yang returned permanently to Paris in 1937. At her death in 1977, she willed her artworks to the Chinese state, and the contents of her studio are now mostly in the collection of the Anhui Provincial Museum. An accomplished portrait sculptor and painter in the post-impressionist style, she also made many prints in her late years, as you see here. Eric Lefebvre at the Musée Chernuschi curated a wonderful exhibition of her Paris period paintings, now in Anhui, at the Asia Society Hong Kong Center a few years ago. And this is a flyer for the 1945 modernist exhibition in which Pan Yang's student Yu Feng exhibited, along with Lin Fengmian, Fan Ganmin, Peng Shunqin, Zhao Wuji, and a number of others. Cai's support was undoubtedly a factor in Xu Beihong's appointment as art program chair at National Central University, where he hired Pan Yang and others sympathetic to his French academic approach. The other Chinese student to enter the Beaux-Arts along with Xu Beihong in 1921 was a Cantonese young woman, Fang Junbi, who, like Cai Weilang, had already lived for a time in France with her family. Her work was remarked upon in both French and Chinese press and praised by Cai Yuanpei in his late years. Her husband became a trusted aide to the politician Wang Jingwei and was assassinated in a failed attempt to kill his boss. Because Wang Jingwei later became a collaborator with the Japanese invaders, this association has somewhat submerged the history of her own artistic career. A somewhat unremarked contribution made by her family to the history of modern art is their donation of this mysterious painting by Lin Fengmian, dated 1929, to the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. To my knowledge, it's the earliest surviving painting by Lin Fengmian to have slipped past the disasters that destroyed his body of work. The role in these cross-cultural currents of artists who studied at the Academy of the Grand Chaumière is equally significant and worthy of further research, but is beyond the scope of our talk today. Artists like Chang Yu, who is said to have been friendly with Giacometti and Picasso, returned from Paris briefly to make a splash in Shanghai in 1927. Pang Shunqian, who co-founded the radical Storm Society, knew Chang Yu in Paris and admired his bold individualism. After establishment of the People's Republic in 1949 and the systematic replacement of modernism with socialist realism, most of the artists we've mentioned today lost their place in the art world. Wu Daoyu and Lin Fengmian were fired from their teaching jobs in Hangzhou in the early 1950s. Some, like Li Jinfa and Liu Jipiao, took refuge in the United States, where their lack of English language skills and discrimination in the period forced them to survive by running chicken farms or laundries. Pang Shunqian and Xu Zhenpeng were hired at the Central Academy of Arts and Crafts, where their modernist talents could be turned to ornamental design. Writer Lin Wenzheng is said to have become a Buddhist after the loss of his wife and to have maintained an altar in her memory. He survived as a translator. Declared a rightist in 1957, during the Cultural Revolution beginning in 1966. Because of his altar, he was accused of illegal superstitions and imprisoned for 20 years. All of them were tortured and imprisoned by the Red Guard during the Cultural Revolution. Ironically, when young Chinese artists sought to replace socialist realism with new international art in the 1980s, they turned first to modernism without knowing anything of this forgotten generation who had trod the same path a half century before. Although its history was suppressed until the new millennium, its traces may be seen in small details. When the unapproved exhibition installed by the Star, the Xingxing Group, on the fence around the National Gallery was confiscated by the Beijing police, the keeper of the gallery's storeroom volunteered to safely house the artworks until the legal matter could be resolved, and successfully negotiated with the police. Who was the sympathetic person? Yu Feng, a former student of Pan Yinang from her Nanjing years. Clodo himself returned to Paris in the summer of 1930, and until the end of his life considered his China experience a key aspect of his artistic identity. In his Paris atelier, he hung a Qi Baishe painting. He impressed the seal Qi Baishe had carved on his 1931 exhibition invitation. He was proud as well of joining the revolution of Sun Yat-sen. An anarchist at the time he went to China, Clodo later joined the Communist Party and the China-France Friendship Society. A number of his students in China rose to positions of respect in the new Chinese communist bureaucracy. His earliest and most notable friends in China, however, made their revolution first and foremost in art. In his studio was left a decorative 1964 calendar for French customers of the Beijing International Bookstore. One wonders what Clodo thought when he saw these new ink landscapes by the colleagues and students he had known in China so many decades before. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.